Saginaw 911, where's your emergency?
We got a dead body on the corner. I think it's a little girl that's in a plastic bag. Somebody dropped it off.
The FBI is involved in trying to find out who killed a little girl and dumped her body on a Saginaw road.
Good morning to you. Steve Noviello here in the Fox 4 newsroom. Pardon the interruption, but we are following breaking news for you right now out of Saginaw. Here's what we know, what we can share. Reports of shots fired near the home of 6-year-old Alanna Gallagher.
In the sleepy town of Saginaw, Texas, a day like any other turned into one of unimaginable horror. This is the story of 6-year-old Alanna Gallagher, a vibrant, free-spirited child who vanished from her neighborhood one July afternoon in 2013. By the next day, her innocence was torn away in a way that would scar her family, her town, and anyone who learned the details. Brace yourself, because this one's going to be hard to hear. It's not a case of random violence. It's something much darker, much more disturbing. Alanna Gallagher was 6, just at that beautiful age where she was discovering herself. Her parents, Carl and Laura, were unconventional and open-minded. They gave her freedom to express herself, a rare thing in small-town Texas, where people can be a little traditional. She was a quirky kid, confident and loving. Alana had that spark, you know, the one that made people feel drawn to her. She roamed the neighborhood, trusting everyone she met. To Alana, the world was safe, her neighbors, friends, and family all watching out for her. So, on July 1st, 2013, Alana was outside doing what she always did, playing, maybe getting up to a bit of mischief. It was around 6 p.m., and her parents were busy. But by nightfall, she hadn't come back, and that was strange for her. The Gallaghers started searching. They knocked on doors, asked neighbors. No one had seen her. Time passed and panic set in. But this wasn't just a kid who wandered off. Deep down, her parents knew something was very wrong. The next morning, Saginaw police received a call from a passerby. There was something dumped by the side of the road wrapped in plastic, something that didn't look right.
Saginaw 911, where's your emergency?
We got a dead body on the corner. I think it's a little girl that's in a plastic bag. Somebody dropped it off. I didn't open it all the way up, but I could see the legs and everything. There was a belt around it, safe.
And it didn't take long to realize it was Alana. Alana's body was found wrapped tightly in a plastic tarp, bound with duct tape. She'd been strangled, beaten, and sexually assaulted. It was a crime of pure cruelty. And here's the thing, her killer didn't even bother to hide her. He left her out there like she was disposable.
The FBI is involved in trying to find out who killed a little girl and dumped her body on a Saginaw road. Fox 4 News, Dion, what's the latest?
Well, throughout this day, the morning and afternoon, investigators have been here at this home collecting and bagging evidence. Police have been very guarded with information. They have confirmed very little, but they have been working throughout this neighborhood. In fact, this morning, the FBI assisting Saginaw police, we've been asked not to show the faces of certain federal investigators, but again, evidence from inside the home and a minivan being gathered, the result of a search warrant following a child who witnesses are calling a little girl, her body found inside some type of bag and wrapped in a tarp and left on a street Monday, not far from the home where she lived. Now, Megan Perez has a four and a half year old twin girl. She lives a couple doors down. She says the 6-year-old girl from that home was at their house 4 or more days a week to play for hours at a time.
From stop sign to stop sign with a backpack, which I never knew what was in that backpack, but she always carried it. And she just would go back and forth by herself.
Now, many are distraught over this. One woman nearby put up a sign in her yard asking people to help police find a possible suspect vehicle, a red truck with a baseball-sized splotch of green paint on the right rear side. Now, police have not identified the child. They have not even confirmed the child's gender, but neighbors are telling us that a little girl lived at this home, 6 years old. Police, meantime, are saying that her identity will have to come from the medical examiner, and they don't expect that to happen until tomorrow at the earliest, after an autopsy takes place.
Now, this kind of thing, it doesn't just happen in a town like Saginaw. The police were out of their depth, but they knew they had to act fast. Forensics teams were brought in. They scoured the tarp, Alana's clothes, and every scrap of evidence they could find. They lifted DNA samples from the scene, and within days there was a match. Now let's meet Tyler Holder. He was 17, lived just a few houses down, and he couldn't have been more different. Tyler was troubled. It wasn't that people hadn't noticed. Neighbors recalled seeing him hanging around alone, often with a look that made people uncomfortable. He was known to be aggressive, and if there's one thing to say about him, it's that he was unhinged in ways that even his own mother couldn't control. Tyler had a history, not the kind you'd know about unless you were looking closely. He'd been caught being cruel to animals, had a fascination with dark websites, and had this eerie habit of stalking people. People saw him, sure, but nobody ever thought he'd take things this far. The DNA led them to Tyler Holder, but here's where things get even more disturbing. When police showed up to arrest him, Holder didn't just go quietly. So, on July 23rd, officers and a SWAT team rolled up to Tyler Holder's home. They were ready to take him in, but Tyler had other ideas. As soon as they confronted him, he pulled a gun, and what followed was a violent shootout. Tyler shot one officer who thankfully survived, but he was finally subdued after being shot himself. Holder was wounded and dragged out of his house. The perfect end for a brutal killer.
First on Fox 4 News at 5:30 tonight, a shootout in Saginaw when a special police task force focused on finding a 6-year-old girl's killer went to arrest her teenage neighbor who they say did it. A police officer and the suspect were both wounded. Somebody raped and dumped 6-year-old Alanna Gallagher's body on a Saginaw street. Her hands and feet were bound and she was wrapped in a tarp. Police say a DNA match put them on 17-year-old Tyler Holder's porch and that he pulled a gun.
People in the neighborhood always figured Tyler Holder walked a crooked line.
He was just kind of eerie, kind of a creepy guy.
Since the murder of 6-year-old Alanna Gallagher, Yolanda Sierra says Holder was always out with other residents, being the concerned neighbor.
I just kind of wanted to be in the limelight a lot about the case, always outside. He went to the memorial that we were at.
Sierra says Holder raised her suspicions after he showed up at the memorial for Alanna Gallagher at Willow Creek Park wearing a wanted T-shirt.
It was a wanted black T-shirt. It said wanted on it, and it was a memorial for a deceased girl, a 6-year-old. So that was kind of, that was a little weird to me.
The day it happened, that night, man, that's all he was talking about.
It's what Holder said that put a chill on the sweltering day that police moved in to arrest him. But what was he saying about it?
We need to find out who did it, and he was all this happened in our neighborhood.
Rodriguez says it's hard to believe his friend could be Alanna Gallagher's killer.
He was weird. He wasn't a normal kid. Nah, he was different. He was different. He was Tyler.
And it's why people here say Holder stayed on their radar.
Just neighbors trying to put pieces together, trying to figure out what's going on. Me and her had a little theory that we thought it could have been him because of the way he was acting.
Holder was already going around and telling neighbors, did you hear that they had identified Alana as the little girl in that tarp.
A little more on that wounded detective. I'll tell you about Charles Lodato. He's a 21-year-old veteran, was named Detective of the Year for the Arlington Police Department earlier this year. He was shot in the groin, made it through surgery. The bullet, we are told, is still lodged in his hip. He is currently in ICU.
Once they had him, Holder confessed to everything. The assault, the murder, dumping Alana's body like she was trash. His confession left investigators and the town horrified, and they realized in that moment this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Holder had planned it. He saw Alana, he stalked her, and he waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. Psychologists reviewed him and the reports were chilling. He had zero empathy. His violent tendencies had been escalating for years. Neighbors said they had noticed strange behavior, violent outbursts, a fascination with dark, violent content online. But no one realized just how far he'd go. To him, Alana wasn't a child. She was an object. In court, Holder's team tried to argue his age, his mental health issues. But with the DNA evidence, his confession, and the horrific nature of the crime, there was no way out. He was sentenced to life without parole. Texas law saved him from the death penalty due to his age. But make no mistake, this guy's never getting out.
The 17-year-old who murdered his 6-year-old neighbor last year in Saginaw is now 18 and headed to prison. Tyler Holder was sentenced under a plea deal for Alanna Gallagher's murder and for shooting and wounding one of the arresting officers.
Yeah, exactly, and there are still purple ribbons here on the trees in front of Alanna Gallagher's home. Purple was her favorite color. Of course, this murder felt by everyone here in the Saginaw community, and today a little bit of closure as the teen charged with the girl's murder accepted a guilty plea.
Relieved for the family.
David Carter, former Saginaw police officer and designer of the Alanna Gallagher Memorial at her elementary school, says he's thankful it's over. What would have been a gut-wrenching capital murder trial next month of Tyler Holder for the rape and murder of 6-year-old Alanna Gallagher in July of last year in Saginaw will not happen. Holder, who lived just a few doors down from the little girl, pleaded guilty to killing her, wrapping the little girl's body in a tarp and dumping her several blocks away. He reached a deal with prosecutors, the murder plea for a life sentence.
I don't think it's ever going to be enough. I think it's the best that it could be in the circumstance.
Holder also pleaded guilty to attempted capital murder of a peace officer. He shot Arlington Detective Charles Lodato during his arrest. His sentence on that, 40 years, stacked on top of the life sentence. So Holder, according to the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office, will spend at least 50 years in prison before he'll be eligible for parole. One of Holder's conditions in the plea deal, no media or cameras in the court hearing when it was finalized before a judge, or the deal would be off. Alana's mom declined to talk on camera, but directed her courtroom victim impact statement directly at Tyler Holder. It said in part, no matter how much suffering you undergo in prison, it won't be as much as all the people who knew and loved Alana have been and will continue to suffer. I hope you remember this, and that you live with shame for what you have done. Every day that you live, every day Alana is gone from us.
Alana's family was shattered. They'd lost their daughter in a way no parent could prepare for. But instead of staying silent, they spoke up. They wanted Alana's death to mean something. They began pushing for better safety protocols in schools, more mental health resources in the community, anything to keep other children from becoming victims. Tyler Holder's crime shook the town, the state, and anyone who followed this case. The Gallaghers and the people of Saginaw were forced to ask themselves the hard questions. Were there signs? Could anyone have stopped him? Could this have been prevented? And honestly, it's hard to say. Sometimes we don't see how dark someone's mind can go until they act on it. But the warning signs were there. And that's what makes this case such a brutal reminder that sometimes monsters aren't lurking in the shadows. They're right next door. Alana's life was short, her death was brutal, but her legacy is a powerful call to action. This case serves as a reminder. Look out for each other, watch for the signs, and never ignore that feeling in your gut. Because sometimes, listening to it is the only thing standing between innocence and horror. Thank you for watching. Stay safe.